today, we're going to create a secure authentication system using Django REST framework and JSON Web Tokens. We'll store our tokens in HTTP-only cookies so that we're safe from cross-site scripting attacks. Since I don't know anyone who remembers their usernames for most websites, we're going to authenticate users with email and passwords. So we'll be creating a custom user model. Once we're done creating our endpoints, we're going to test them in the Next.js website that we're going to create together. It's going to be fun. We're going to learn a lot. Let's get started. Let's create a directory for our project to live in and open it in Visual Studio Code. Now let's fire up terminal and talk about prerequisites. So we're gonna need Node.js version 18.18 or later. I'm gonna double check that I have Node installed and I have an appropriate version. Yep, I have an appropriate version. Since we're going to be using Django for the backend, then we're also going to need Python version 3.10 or higher. I'll check the version I have. All right, I'm all good. Now we're gonna create two directories, one for our front end and one for our back end. Back end, front end. So now let's cd into our back end directory and let's create a virtual environment. Pi m venv. Okay, now let's activate it. Venv scripts activate. Now let's install Django. I'll be using pip and the command is pip install Django. Let's hit enter. And while we wait for Django to install, I would like to ask you to hit the like button if you're enjoying the content. And if you haven't subscribed already, please don't forget to subscribe. So now that we've installed Django, how about we create the scaffolding of our project? The command for starting a new Django project is Django-admin start project, and then the name we want to give our project. Let's call it API. And we want it to be created in the same directory, so let's add a period and hit enter. Alrighty, and here is our project. Let's go ahead and create an app and call it users. So pi manage.py start app users. Enter. Alrighty, here's our app. Now let's tell Django about it. Let's go to settings.py and add users to installed apps. One of the reasons we're creating the users app is to help us handle our users when it comes to registration, logging in and logging out, and everything to do with authentication. So let's go to models.py because we want to define a custom user model. Django comes with a very powerful user model included in its built-in authentication system. However, this user model expects us to authenticate our users with username and password. And honestly, I usually forget my username, so I'd rather log in with email and password. Luckily, Django provides abstract user model, which behaves identically to the default user model with the added benefit of being customizable. So let's copy the import statement and paste it in our models.py, and we will be subclassing it in our custom user model. The custom user model, like the default user model, comes with some fields by default, including username, first name, last name, email, and password. And by default, the unique identifier is the username field. In our case, we want to be able to authenticate with email and password. So let's set the username field to email. And now we want to make sure that no two users can have the same email address. So we need to set unique to true. Now, since required fields should not contain username field, let's override it and set it to an empty list. Now we need to tell Django about our custom user model. So let's go to settings.py and let's add auth underscore user underscore model. And we want to set it to our custom user model. Our app's name is users, so users.custom user. Now let's update our database by first making migrations. So manage.py make migrations and then migrating to apply the migrations. So manage.py migrate. Awesome. Now let's create a new file and call it serializers.py. And that's where we're going to define our serializers. Let's define custom user serializer, which we will use for serializing user data, like converting a user object into JSON and vice versa. It will be useful for when we want to retrieve, update, or display user data. Now, we would want to inherit from DRF's model serializer, which lets us automatically create a serializer class with fields that correspond to the model fields. So it's a huge time saver. Of course, to use it, we first need to install Django REST framework. So let's type the command pip install Django REST framework. Hit enter. Awesome. Now we need to add it to installed apps. So let's go to settings.py and let's scroll up to installed apps. We're gonna just add REST underscore framework. Alrighty, now we're ready to harness its power. Let's go back to serializers.py and we want to import model serializer. So from REST framework dot serializers import model serializer. And of course, our custom user serializer will inherit from model serializer. And now we want to declare class meta. And we want to set our model to our custom user model, which we need to import. So from models, import custom user. Now let's specify the fields to be serialized. So we don't want all of these fields. We just want ID, email, and username. Now we wanna write a view in order to handle incoming requests. How about we use the RetrieveUpdateAPIView, which provides get, put, patch, and delete method handlers. It's great because it will allow us to retrieve and update user data. So let's import it. So from REST framework.generics import RetrieveUpdateAPIView. What should we call our view? How about user info view? Of course, it will inherit from RetrieveUpdateAPIView, and we don't want unauthenticated users to be able to access this view. So let's set permission classes to isAuthenticated, which we're gonna need to import. So from REST framework.permissions import isAuthenticated. Alrighty. Now let's set serializer class to custom user serializer, which we have just defined. So from serializers import custom user serializer. Alrighty. So like we said, the serializer will format the response and handle the updates. Now let's define get object method, which determines the object returned by the view. And we want to return the logged in user. So we'll return self.request.user. Now inside our users app, let's create a new file and call it urls.py. And that's where we're going to define URL patterns to map requests to views. So from Django.urls, let's import path, and also let's import our user info view from use import user info view. Now let's define the path for our user info. We want our user info view to be the view to process the request. The asView method turns it into a callable view. Finally, let's set name to user info. Now we need to go to the urls.py that was created for us in the API directory, and we're going to need to include the paths from our user's app. That's why I imported include. Let's include the user's URLs under the API/users path, and we want to include the URLs from our user's app. So users.urls. Alrighty, now we can go ahead and run server to test our API endpoint. So py manage.py run server. Alrighty, let's follow link. Let's go to API/users and then to user info. So users/user info. Oh, here it is. So since we've set permission classes to is authenticated, we are getting a forbidden error. And the reason is authentication credentials were not provided, which means everything is working as expected. Now let's go back to serializers.py and let's start defining register user serializer. That's also going to inherit from the model serializer. Once again, let's declare class meta and we'll set model to custom user and fields to email, username, and password. And let's add extra quarks to make our password field a write-only field. So we want to set write-only to true. Now let's define create method, which is responsible for taking validated data that our serializer has cleaned and using it to create a new user in our database. So custom user dot object dot create user, and we want to pass in our validated data. Finally, let's return user. Now let's go back to views.py and let's start defining class user registration view. And this view is going to be so easy to create thanks to DRF's create API view, which is used for create only endpoints. It will handle validation and create a user for us and return a response. So let's import it, pass it in, and now all we got to do is set serializer class to our register user serializer. So let's import it. Okay, now let's go to urls.py and let's set up a URL path for user registration. Let's make it register and let's import our user registration view as it will handle requests. So user registration view as view. Let's set name to register user. Alrighty, so we never actually stopped server. So let's go back to our site and let's go to the endpoint API/users. Oh, here's register. So let's go to it. Yay! User registration. It worked. Let's try it out. I'll input a fake email and a username. I'll call it test user 1 and a password. Let's make the password something random like Professor Donut 7. And let's hit post. Alrighty. User created. Now, how about we create a super user so that we can log into the admin? Let's stop server and create a super user with the command manage.py create super user. Alrighty, let's hit enter. Email, password. Okay. Uh-oh, we got an error. User.create super user is missing one required positional argument, username. Okay, so we're getting this error because Django's create super user method expects a username. But since we have created a custom user and we've set username field to email, it is now confused. It still wants to pass username as the required field. So we need to fix this. So let's create a new file and call it managers.py. And we're going to extend the base user manager. So let's import it. Alrighty, now let's define class custom user manager. That of course will inherit from the base user manager. And we want to override the create super user method as well as the create user method. Let's start with overriding create user. I'll just copy this line and paste it to save time. I'll remove date of birth and instead I'll add extra fields. First, we want to make sure email is provided, and if it's not, then we want to raise value error. We could have it say email is required, for example. Okay, so if we have an email, we want to make sure it's normalized, no capital letters. So self.normalize email, pass in the email. Next up, we want to create user object. So let's set user to self.model and we'll set email to email and we'll pass in the extra fields. Finally, we want to set password. Set password is a built-in method that hashes passwords and stores a hashed version of the password. At this stage, our user would have been created in memory. Now we want to save it to database. User.save. Now let's return user and start defining create super user method, which will also take self email, password set to none, and extra fields. Alrighty, so of course our super user needs permission to access the admin. So we want to set its staff to true because that's the one that allows user to access the admin. To do this, we'll just type extra fields dot set default, and we're gonna set is staff to true. We also want to set is super user to true by default. So extra fields dot set default is super user true. Okay, now we want to double check. If not extra fields dot get is staff, because if it's not set to staff, then we want to raise a value error because this is unacceptable. We want to say super user must have is staff true. We want to also make sure that if not extra fields dot get is super user, And we also want to raise an error because that's also unacceptable. So raise value error. And I'm going to copy the statement, paste it, and just change a staff to super user. Okay, finally we want to return self dot create user, and we want to pass in the email, password, and extra fields. Now we need to make sure that our custom user model uses our manager that we've just created. So from manager, oh, I called it manager instead of managers. Let's fix that. So rename managers. Okay. All right. So from managers, import custom user manager. And all we gotta do is just set objects to our user manager like that. And now if we try to create super user again, I think we're not gonna get an error. Let's try. So py create super, oops, py create super user. Okay, email, let's add an email, pico@email.com. Password, I'll input a silly password for now. And yes, I want to bypass password validation. Okay, super user created successfully. That's great. So let's run server, py run server. And now let's try to go back to our admin login page and let's type in the email, which is pico@email.com, and the password. All right. Wait, didn't I set it to pico@email.com? Oh, I wrote .cpm. Oh my god. Okay, so .cpm. Fine. Okay. Log in. We logged in. I'm glad. We do not see users right here because in order to see them, we need to register our custom user model. So let's go to admin.py and let's import our custom user model so we can register it. So from models, import custom user. Now let's define class custom user admin, which will inherit from model admin. And for now, let's just type in pass. We can customize it later. And let's add the decorator to register it, which is just at admin.register custom user. That should do it. So let's go back and refresh. Ta-da! Users, we did it. Okay, let's click on it. Oh, we see the super user we've created, as well as test user 1 that we've created from our register endpoint. Yes, I'm happy to see it. Let's click on it. As you can see, the password is hashed as it should be. Okay, since we are logged in as Pico, let's go to API/users/user info and see if we'll see Pico's user info. Yes, we do. We got a successful response because we are authenticated. We are logged in. But if we weren't, we would get a 403 forbidden response. Actually, while we're here, let's fix this strange typo I made earlier and add a username. Let's make it Pico. Hit put. Alrighty, it worked. We updated it. Oops. Now it's time to start defining our login serializer. So we're back in serializers.py. Now let's start defining class login user serializer. And this time we don't want to inherit from model serializer. We actually want to inherit from Serializer. Serializer, according to the docs, provides a powerful generic way to control the output of your responses. Let's import it. Okay, so we're expecting to receive an email and a password. And when we get them, we need to make sure they're in the right format, normalize them, and change them to the correct data type. Thanks to DRF's serializer fields, we can do this very easily. So let's just import serializers because we're about to use them. Just paste the import statement and set email to serializers dot email field, and we could also set required to true. Now it's password's turn. Let's set it to serializers dot character field, and we want to set write only to true. Now we want to override the validate method. So def validate, and of course we want to pass in the data because we want to validate it and make sure that it matches the data in the database. To do this, we're going to need Django's authenticate. So let's import it from Django.contrib.auth import authenticate. Now let's set user to authenticate, and we want to authenticate the data. Alrighty, now let's add an if statement and check if this returns true and that the user is active. If that's the case, then all is good and we want to return user. However, if that's not the case, we want to raise validation error and say incorrect credentials or something like that. Now let's go to views.py and start defining our login view. So class login view, and our login view is gonna inherit from REST framework's API view. So let's import it. I'm gonna copy the import statement and just paste it. And now let's pass it in. Now let's define post method that's going to get called when a client makes a post request to the endpoint. Request would contain the user data, including the email and password. We're gonna need to validate our data, so let's import our login user serializer. And let's set serializer to login user serializer, and let's pass the data request.data. The next step is going to be generating tokens for our user. For this, we're gonna need Simple JWT. So we're gonna need to install it. The command is pip install Django REST framework -simple JWT. Let's fire up terminal again and stop server. Paste the command. Okay, now we're gonna need to go back to settings.py and add REST framework Simple JWT to installed apps. And we're going to want to specify a default authentication class. So I'm just going to copy this, paste it, clean it up. Unfortunately, this class is not going to work for us because by default, Simple JWT expects tokens to be sent in the header while we're using cookies. So we're gonna need to create our own. So let's go back to our users directory and let's create a new file and let's call it authentication.py. I'm going to copy the word authentication and paste it. All right, py. Now let's create class CookieJWTAuthentication, and it will inherit from Simple JWT's JWT Authentication class. So I am going to import it from REST framework Simple JWT JWT-authentication, import JWT authentication. All right, let's pass it in. And let's write pass for now. We'll come back to it later. Right now, let's go back to settings.py. I'm copying the name of our class and I'm gonna paste it here. Now let's go back to views.py and we wanna first check if Serializer is valid. If it is, we wanna get the data within it. So let's set user to Serializer dot validated data. Now we want to generate refresh token. For this, we're going to need to import refresh token. So I'll copy the import statement from the docs and paste it and set refresh to refresh token and we'll pass in user. Okay, now let's create the access token. The access token should be a string, so we'll use the string method and we'll use it on the access token associated with our refresh token, like so. Now let's prepare a response. We're going to use Django REST's response class, which subclasses Django's simple template response. So let's import it. So from REST framework dot response, import response, and we want to send our user data. So custom user serializer user dot data. Also, let's add status, and we want to set it to 200. So let's import status from REST framework. So from REST framework, import status. And now let's set status to status.http 200. Okay. Now let's set cookie. So response dot set cookie. And let's set key to access token, because that's where we're keeping our access token. And make the value access token. And to make sure that our cookie is not accessible by JavaScript, we're going to set HttpOnly to true. We also want to set secure to true as well. And same site to strict. Now we want to set our refresh token also. So response.set cookie. And we'll make the key refresh token value. We'll use the string method on refresh. And just like we've done for our access token cookie, we wanna set HTTP only to true, secure to true, and same site to strict. Now let's return response. Okay, and if things don't go according to plan, then we want to send back the validation errors. So serializer dot errors. We also want to set status to HTTP 400 bad request. Okay, so we could also define logout view. So class logout view. Let's define the post method. Pass in self and request. Firstly, we want to get our refresh token. So request dot cookies dot get, and we want to get the refresh token. Okay, now let's double check if we found the refresh token. If we found it, then we want to decode it. Refresh equals refresh token, and we pass in the refresh token. And then we want to blacklist it. Blacklisting tokens is something Simple JWT can help with, as it comes with a blacklist app. To use it, we need to include it in our list of installed apps. So I'm gonna copy the app's path from the docs and just go back to settings.py, scroll up to installed apps, and I'll just include it. Since we're here in settings.py, let's also customize our Simple JWT token settings. So let's create a dictionary called Simple JWT. Now let's copy the variables we want to customize and paste them. Okay, so in order to set how long is the token's lifetime, we're going to need to import time delta. I'll copy the import statement from the docs and paste it. Okay, I think access token lifetime 5 minutes is cool, it's fine. Refresh token lifetime 1 day, I think it's fine too. So this dictionary in the docs has the default values for the settings. Let's go through it and see if we want to change anything. Okay, so auth header types is by default set to bearer, which works for us. Auth token classes is set to access token, which also works for us. So we're all good. So let's go back to views.py. And we said that we wanted to blacklist the refresh token if it exists. Let's add try block just in case. Try to get the token, and then once we have it, we would like to blacklist it. Blacklisting tokens is so easy. All we gotta do is just add .blacklist. So .blacklist. So let's add the except block, except exception as E, and we want to return a response with the error. So error, we could say error invalidating token. And for clarity, we also want to pass in the actual exception as a string. And we want to set status to HTTP 400 bad request. So if all goes well, then we want to return response saying all is good. So let's set response to response with message successfully logged out, and status HTTP 200. Okay. Also, let's delete the cookies. Response dot delete cookie, and we want to delete the cookie with the access token, as well as the cookie with the refresh token. Okay, so that should do it. So before doing anything else, I'm going to review the code starting from the top. Okay, I feel like this is incorrect. It should be refresh token dot for user, and then we pass in the user. Okay, as far as I can see, things seem okay. If we get errors later, we'll fix them. Now let's go to authentication.py again. And let's begin by overriding the authenticate method. All right, now we wanna retrieve the token from the cookies. So let's set token to request.cookies.get. And we want to get the access token. If no token is found, so if not token, return none. Alrighty, now we want to try and validate our token. So let's set validated token to self.get validated token, and we'll pass our token. And we want to catch authentication failed exception. So let's import authentication failed from REST framework JWT.exceptions. Except authentication failed. I'm gonna raise authentication failed. Let's add an F string and say, for example, token validation failed. Also pass the exception as a string. Finally, we want to retrieve and return the authenticated user. So let's set user to self.getUser, and we'll pass in the validated token. Alrighty, then we can return the user and validated token. Okay, now let's add except block, except authentication failed, and in that case we want to also raise an authentication failed error. So make it an F string and say error retrieving user, and we can pass in the exception as a string. Now let's go to urls.py and create routes for login and logout. So path login. Let's import our login view as well as logout view. So login view, logout view. Now login view as view, and we can set the name to user login. Now logout, path, logout, logout view as view, and the name could be user logout. Now let's run server. So py manage.py run server. Alrighty, so we got an error and it seems it's okay. So I know what happened. Settings.py, where we added default authentication classes. Instead of writing users.authentication, I kept it simple JWT. I'm hoping this should fix it. Oh, it did. It says here we have unapplied migrations, so let's apply them. So py manage.py make migrations. Okay, now py manage.py migrate. Okay, awesome. Now let's try to run server again. So py manage.py run server. Now let's try to go to the login endpoint. Let's try to log in as the test user. What was the email again? I'm gonna go back and check. Oh yeah, fake email at email.com. I'll copy it. And we want to send in a JSON. So let's set email to fake email at email.com. And let's set password to the password which was Professor Donut 7. All right, let's click post. Okay, it worked. HTTP 200, okay, nice. If we go to admin, we'll find that we have tokens over here. And here's the token that we've used to sign in just now. If we go to blacklisted tokens, right now it's empty. Let's see what would happen if we log out. So let's go to the logout endpoint. I'll type in the details like I've done earlier. Okay, let's hit post. Okay, successfully logged out. let's go to admin again and click on blacklisted token, and yay, the blacklisted token is here. So the logout works. So far so good, but we still haven't set up a token refresh endpoint. And as you might know, Simple JWT does provide token refresh view, but it doesn't support HTTP cookies by default. It expects tokens to be provided in the request body as a JSON payload. So let's go to our views.py again, and we're going to define class cookie token refresh view that is going to subclass JWT's token refresh views. So we're going to import it. So from REST framework simple JWT dot views import token refresh view. Let's subclass it and let's define post method. Okay, now we wanna get the refresh token from the cookie. So let's set refresh token to request dot cookies in all caps dot get refresh token. If not refresh token, we want to return response with an error. You can say refresh token not provided and set status to 401 unauthorized. So yep. Now let's try to decode and verify the refresh token. So we'll set refresh to refresh token and pass in our refresh token. And then we want to try to generate an Axios token. So refresh dot Axios token. We would like to turn it into a string, so let's use the string method on it. All right, now let's prepare our response. Axios token refreshed successfully, for example. We could also set status to status.http 200. Okay, let's fix that. All right, let's set our Axios token in the cookie. So response.setCookie. Actually, we can just copy the part where we set the Axios token in the login view, since it looks basically the same. So I'm just copying and pasting this bit. Return response. So if something goes wrong, so except, we want to watch out for invalid tokens. So let's import invalid token. So from REST framework simple JWT dot exceptions import invalid token. Okay, so except invalid token, we can return response error invalid token and set status to HTTP 401 unauthorized. Okay, now let's go to urls.py and let's import our cookie token refresh view, and let's set up the refresh path. So path refresh cookie token refresh view as view, and we can set the name to token refresh. All right. Okay, now how about we go to the endpoint API/users, and here's our token refresh route. Let's follow it. Let's go to the refresh endpoint and see how it looks like. Okay, cookie token refresh. Nice. Okay, so I'm very excited about testing this on the front end. Before we start creating our Next.js app, let's install Django course headers. what we're gonna need Django course headers for is to access our resources from another domain, which is our front end. Let's install it. I'll copy the install command and stop server and paste the command. Okay, cool. We installed Django course headers successfully. Now let's add it to installed apps. So back to settings we go. Scroll up to installed apps and just paste course headers. Okay. Now let's add this to middleware. So I'm just copying and pasting. And for now, we're going to set course allow all origins to true. However, don't do that in production. Let's also set course allow credentials to true, which allows cookies to be included in cross-site HTTP requests. All right. Now let's go back to views.py, and I did set same site to strict, but this won't work for us because we'll be working in a cross-origin setup. So let's change it to none. Now let's start working on the front end for a bit. So let's fire up new terminal, cd to front end. Let's use the npx create next app command to create our Next.js app. I'll type npx create next app at latest. And since we already have a front end directory that we're in right now, and we want our Next.js app to be created in it, I'll just add a period. Okay, it's asking if I'd like to use TypeScript. No, thank you. ESLint, okay. Tailwind, yes, please. Source directory, yes. App router, yes. TurboPack, no. No. Okay, cool. It's installing dependencies. Okay, our Next.js app is ready. Okay, so before we start working on it, I'm going to close all those open tabs. Alrighty, now we can focus better. So let's try to run dev. So npm run dev. Let's see if our app works properly. Okay, follow link. Okay, here it is. Cool. Okay, now let's quickly create our login page. So let's create directory login in the app folder, and inside it let's create page.js, and now let's create a React component and call the function login page. All right, and now let's go back to our browser and let's try to go to /login. All right, cool. Here is our login page. Let's also create register page, and I'm just going to copy the definition from the login page, create page.js, and just paste everything and change login page to register page. All right, now let's try to go to register. Okay, cool, it works. Okay, now let's create a new directory and call it utils, and that's where we want to keep logic related to authentication. So let's create file called auth.js, and we want to define register user function. That's going to be an async function. Okay, let's also add export. We're also going to need a login user function and a logout user function. All right, so for our user to register, we will require email, username, and password. So let's add the params, email, username, password. And for login, we will need email and password. So let's add the params, email, and password. Okay, alrighty. Now let's create a variable to hold our API URL. So I'm just gonna run our backend server again. So py manage.py run server. Alrighty, let's click on the link, go to the API's endpoint. So copy and paste. Our register user function would want to try to make a post request to the register endpoint. So let's install Axios, because that's what we'll use to make HTTP requests. I'll copy the command from the docs, which is npm install Axios, and just stop server and paste it and hit enter. Okay, now let's import Axios. So import Axios from Axios, and in our try block, let's set const response to await Axios.post. We want to make a post request to our register endpoint. So API URL register. And of course, we want to send along the email, username, and password. And since we'll be dealing with cookies, let's set with credentials to true. Okay, if all is good, let's return response.data. And if something is wrong, let's throw new error registration failed. Okay, now let's go back to our register user page and let's create a form with input fields for our username, email, and password. To keep track of the value of our input fields, let's import React's useStateHook. But before we do that, let's add useClient, import useState from React. We'll use useState to manage our input fields values. So let's define const username, set username, and I'll initialize it to an empty string. We'll do the same for password and set password, and for email and set email. All right, super cool. Okay, now let's add onChange event listeners to our input fields. For the username's input field on change, we want to set username to the value inputted. For the email input field, we want to set email to the value inputted. And for the password input field, we want to set password to the value inputted. Okay, now let's run server again. So npm run dev to check on our register page and see if there are any errors. Hopefully there aren't. Oh, cool. It looks terrible, but at least there are no errors. Since we have Tailwind and styling things brings me joy, I'm just going to add some styling. Not much, just to make looking at this form a little bit more bearable. Zoom out a bit. Okay, for the containing div, let's give it min height screen and then background color. Let's make it gray 100. Items center, flex call, and justify center. All right, and now our form, let's give it background gray 600, padding 8, flex call, gap. That's actually pretty decent looking. Okay, we could give the button class name background blue 400 and padding 1 rounded small. Alrighty, now let's zoom back in again and let's add on submit event listener to our form and set it to handle submit, which is a function we are about to define. So const handle submit, it's gonna be an async function. Okay, we want to prevent the form from reloading the page, so let's add prevent default. We don't want to submit the form if username is empty, or if the password is empty, or if the email is empty. So if that's the case, then we just want to return. If we have an email, a password, and a username, then we want to try and register the user. So let's import our register user function, and we'll await register user. If all works out, let's have an alert say, yay, it worked. User created. If it doesn't work, let's also have an alert that says, oops. Okay, so of course this is just for testing and just for testing things quickly. Now let's test. So let's input a username. Oh, the text is white. Let's change that because it's hard to see. So for the input fields, we can add class name and have text be gray 600. Yeah, that's better. Okay, let's set text gray for all the input fields we have. Okay, now let's try username, email, and password. Now let's hit register. It said oops. Why did it say oops? Let's inspect. URL doesn't end in a slash. Okay, so let's go back to our auth.js and add a slash. I think that should fix it. I hope so. I hope so. This time let's make the username lock, the email lucky@lock.com, the password look 7. Okay, let's hit register. Yay, it worked. User created. Yes, that's nice. Okay, now let's go to our admin and let's click on users. Yay, here's our new user that we created from our front end. Okay, now let's continue defining our login user function. It's gonna be very similar to our register user function. We're gonna have a try and a catch block. So I'll just copy from the register user function and paste. Of course, the endpoint is login, not register. And we want to pass only the email and the password. We want to have with credentials set to true, so this is good. We want to return response.data, so that's good. And the error we want to throw is login failed. Okay, now let's go to the login page and let's make a form element. Why not copy from the register component we've made earlier? Like we've done for register, we're gonna need use client, and we're gonna need to import use state, and we want to track the state of our password as well as our email. We're gonna need a handle submit function also. So I'm just gonna copy the handle submit function and then we're gonna edit it. I'm gonna copy the styling of the div. Also copy the form element and the styling we've added to it. Let's add the closing tag. Okay, and we're going to need an email field and a password field, so I'm copying those and pasting them inside our form. Of course, we're gonna need a button, so I'll copy and paste but our button will say login. Now let's go back to our browser and see how our login page looks like now. Okay, it actually looks good. Okay, so let's make it work. We gotta edit our handle submit function. We want to import login user and we want to await login user, not register user. And we won't be passing username. We'll just pass the email and the password. And the alert we want to say is yay, logged in successfully. All right, let's try. So let's go back to the browser, and it already added fake email and the password because I keep testing websites with this fake email when I'm testing locally, and the same password also. So we can test right away by clicking on login. But before we do you guys remember the outstanding tokens here? So we've logged in before, that's why we have a token over here. And if our login is successful, we're supposed to see a new token. So let's click login. Oh, we got an error. If username. Oh, there's no username. Okay, sorry. So let's try now. Yay, logged in successfully. Okay, let's see. Let's refresh. It worked. Yes, we did it. All right, now let's see if we can log out our users. Let's go back to auth.js and let's add the logic to our logout user function. Our logout user function does not require any params, but we do want to add a try block and a catch block, so I'll copy those and paste them from the login function. We do want to make a post request, but it's to the logout endpoint. And instead of sending email and password, we'll replace that with null. Instead of throw new error login failed, we'll have it be logout failed. Okay, so do you guys remember how when we defined our logout view, we made it so that when the user logs out, the refresh token is blacklisted? Okay, so when we log out our user from the front end, we should see a new blacklisted token added. So let's add a logout button. Let's add it to the home page. So let's remove all of this and just add a button and have it say logout and set on click to handle logout. And then let's define handle logout. We want it to be an async function. Now let's import the logout function we have defined earlier. So import logout user, and now let's call it, so await logout user. Alrighty, and let's make sure to remove the image import because we're not using any images. And let's add use client. Okay, let's go back to our browser, and here's our logout button. Before we click it, let's log in again. I am almost sure that we are no longer logged in because we have a very short-lived access token. It was set to just 5 minutes, so it's valid for 5 minutes. So let's go back to login, and let's log in again. All right, cool. Okay, so right now we have 2 blacklisted tokens. Let's see if we'll get a third one when we click logout. I hope we do. Let's click on logout. Okay, and now let's refresh. Oh, there it is. Now, how about we make it so that if the user is logged in, we say, hey, and mention the username. And if the user is not logged in, then we would ask the user to log in or something like that. Okay, so let's import use state. So we're gonna use it to track the user object. So const user and set user. Let's initialize it to null. If user, then we want to say hi user dot username. Otherwise, we can say welcome stranger or something like that. Okay, so right now it says welcome stranger. Okay, in order to check if the user is logged in or not and to get the user's username, we can make a GET request to the user info endpoint. So let's go back to auth.js and let's define get user info function. I'm going to copy paste the log user to save myself some time. So let's call this function get user info. And like we said, we'll make a GET request to the user info endpoint. Let's remove null. Okay, now the only thing we want to change is this. We can say getting user failed. Now let's go back to our home page and let's import get user info as well as use effect, because we are going to want to try and check if the user is authenticated and get the info as soon as the component renders. So let's use the use effect hook, keep the dependency array empty. And now let's define an async function and let's call it get user, and let's set const user details, for example, and set it to await get user info. Okay, now if user details, we want to set user to user details. Okay, and that's it. That should do it. Oh, first we need to call the function and then that would be it. That would do it after we call get user. Okay, now let's refresh. Yay, it worked. It says hi test user. Nice. Okay, so we've also defined a refresh token endpoint to help us refresh our access tokens when they expire. So let's go back to auth.js and let's start defining refresh token function. To save time, I'm going to copy the logout user function and edit it. So let's call it refresh token. And we want to make a post request to the refresh endpoint. And if things fail, we can say refreshing token failed. Okay, so let's test it. Let's test our refresh token function. How about we add a new button and have it say refresh token, and instead of handle logout, we could set on click to handle refresh. And now let's define handle refresh. So const handle refresh. It's going to be an async function as well. And oh, we should also import our refresh token function. When the refresh token button is clicked, let's just call the refresh token function. And just to make our website more consistent, I'm going to copy the class names we have given the div element in register.py and paste it here. And I'll create another div and give it the class names we have given our form element. All right, now if we go back to our browser, that's how our welcome page looks like. Of course, we could also give the buttons the same styling we have given the buttons in the forms. I'm going to do that too because it's just so easy to do. So why not do it? All right. Okay. Now that's how they look like. Okay, we can give them a margin. Okay, better. All right. So You guys remember how long was our access token's lifetime? Let's go back to settings.py to check. Yeah, it was set to 5 minutes, which is short. But to test our refresh endpoint, let's set it to very, very short. For example, let's set it to 0.2 minutes. Okay, and now let's go back. And yeah, sure, we're already not logged in, but our refresh token should still be active. So let's click on it and refresh. We logged in again. It worked. Oh, we are already logged out again. And now let's see what's going on with the cookies. So I opened Chrome DevTools. Let's go to Application and click on Cookies. And let's click on the access token. Right now it ends with JJM. Okay, let's click on refresh token. See, we got a new access token. It worked. All right, we'll end the video here. I feel like with this, you have what you need to create your own authentication system. Make sure to play around a lot, customize, have fun, check the Django docs, check the DRF docs, the Simple JWT docs. They're fun to read. Yeah, and have fun. Make something nice. And if you do, tell me about it. Okay, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, give it a like. And if you haven't subscribed already, please subscribe. And see you soon. Bye.